Welcome to a new episode of the Unicorn Bakery. Today's guest built a product that more than 1 billion people are using and more than 2 billion people downloaded over time. In fact, if you own an iPhone, it's part of the core functionality by now. Chris Barton is the founder of Shazam, and after 18 years since its founding, Shazam was sold to Apple for $400 million, making it Apple's 6th largest transaction. Today, Chris is a keynote speaker talking about innovation, I can imagine product building, and a lot of other topics can dive deeper in a second. Chris, welcome to the bakery.
Thanks for having me, Fabian.
You founded Shazam back in 2000, and there were no iPhones. There was nothing that or for me at least, I was 4 years old. I cannot really recall it. It's just how I perceive it. But there were no iPhones. What was the first idea and prototype of Shazam looking like, and how did you come up with it?
Yeah, so I like to say the idea came from solving two problems. One problem was that I would hear music in my daily life, just like everyone else would, and I'd wonder what it was. And the reality is everyone had that problem at the time, and frankly, it was even a common entrepreneur's dream to see if they could solve it. There were actually 6 companies trying to solve that problem. So that was one problem. The second problem, and you have to keep in mind that when I came up with the idea for Shazam, it was the end of 1999. The second problem is that everyone's carrying around these phones. Now, just picture what phones looked like back then, right? They were like little Nokias and Ericssons and so on. And basically they had monochrome screens with something like 40 by 50 pixels. And really the only thing you could do on these phones was make phone calls and send text messages. And that was it. That was literally everything you could do. There actually was one other thing that was a highly advanced feature, and it was downloading monophonic ringtones. And that was a really advanced thing, and you can show your friends, hey, look, my phone makes a different sound when it rings. And so I was doing my MBA at Berkeley, and I was thinking, gosh, I would like to solve both these problems. And that's what led me to the idea of Shazam. But the original idea was just to identify songs playing on the radio, because that's actually a relatively easy problem. There were actually existing technologies to do it. And that idea is the one that 6 other companies had come up with, and now all those companies are defunct, except one, which is Sony Corporation. But luckily, the real breakthrough idea of Shazam was not, hey, what's that song? When people come up to me, they say, oh, how'd you come up with that idea? What's that song? I always like to say that's an obvious idea. Many people had that idea. The breakthrough idea is, wow, what if you could identify the song out of thin air? So literally the sound, the ambient sound in the room coming to the microphone of your phone is the way you're going to identify the song. And of course, it's accompanied by background noises and so on. And so that is basically the breakthrough idea of Shazam, and that's what we built. And as you indicated, it was a long time ago. There were no apps. There were no GUI interfaces, graphical user interfaces, or anything. So we were very limited in what we could do. I mean, keep in mind, we were essentially inventing an app company 7 years before apps existed, and it was years before Steve Jobs even came up with the idea for the iPhone. So that's how ahead of our time we were. The App Store came out in 2008, and we're starting this in 2000. So the original version of Shazam, we worked with what we had. And what we had is that every phone had a microphone, and every phone could receive a text message. And we were able to build the service just based on those 2 capabilities and make it accessible by every mobile phone in our first market where we launched, which was the United Kingdom. So the way it worked is you simply dialed a 4-digit phone number that made a voice phone call. We secured that 4-digit phone number by partnering with the mobile phone companies. And it was 2580, which happens to be the only 4 digits that's in a straight line on a mobile phone. You dialed 2580, initiated a voice phone call. We answered the call with an interactive voice response system, so an automated telephone system that answered the call. We immediately began recording sound, and then we simply terminated the call after about 15 or 20 seconds. And then we had your caller ID, so we sent you a text message with the name of the song that we'd identified, and that was Shazam. That was the way we launched the service.
You said you launched it back then. So how many people were using it? Was it also something that people were talking about and it became talk of the town, word of mouth, or was it something that was super hard until it picked up?
Yeah, I would say we did not achieve the traction of customer adoption by anywhere close to what we had hoped. Because the reason is, this is what I always like to say to entrepreneurs, is that it is incredibly hard to change user behavior. And when you're getting, even if you offer someone a really amazing product. And so the reality is that when we showed Shazam to someone, whether it was a venture capitalist or just someone walking down the street, you'd show it to people back then and they would say, oh my gosh, you just dial a phone number and then a text message comes to your phone with the name of the song. Wow, I would use that every day. That's what they would say. But the reality is that we had to get people to learn that. We had to get people to learn that there's a phone number you can dial, and then you would, identify songs and get a text message back to your phone. And whereas apps don't have to get people to learn that there are apps, right? That's an understood behavior. It's an understood behavior that there's an app store that you can download apps and that you can start using them. We didn't have that advantage. So we had to literally take all these millions of people that had mobile phones and tell them there's something new you can do with your phone other than make phone calls and send text messages. And it's do this music identification. And getting the message out was very, very difficult. We had a whole marketing budget. We hired a premier marketing person that had run the largest radio station group in the United Kingdom. And we did everything you can imagine in marketing, including billboards, banner ads, TV ads, radio ads. I mean, literally the radio ads would say, we'd place them as the last ad slot. So it'd say, you're about to hear a song on the radio, try it right now. Perfect, right? We had hired people to walk into bars and tell people in bars you could use this. But still, ultimately you have a cost of customer acquisition. And of course, we're making very little money because, by the way, the only way we could make money back then, since there were no music downloads or advertising, the only way we could make money was the same model that directory inquiries made money, which is each time you call, you get a small charge. So it was 50 pence each time you use Shazam. But, it costs us more than 50 pence to get a new user, right? So, or more than the 50 pence times the number of usages. So the reality is that we had, I don't know the exact numbers, but we'll call it tens of thousands of users, right? Compared to today where Shazam has hundreds of millions of monthly active users. And as a result, we struggled and nearly went bankrupt for over 6 years from launch.
The only real uplift was when there was an app store. You decided, okay, we have to be on there, and then everything was a completely different story.
Yeah, the App Store completely changed the game for us. And it wasn't us saying we have to be on there, luckily, because what Apple was doing, when Apple launched the App Store, they do things very well. And one thing they wanted to do is make sure that App Store is very impressive out the gate, right? So they actually put a lot of thought into thinking, what are going to be some of the best showcase apps that we can have on the day we launch the App Store. And they went and they actually even approached companies such as game manufacturers to build those first wave of apps that came out. It was a small number of apps. I don't know the exact number, but it was probably in the hundreds. And Shazam was one of them because it was what a perfect app. Of course, we had been knocking on the doors of Apple, but luckily Apple was also knocking on the doors of Shazam saying this would be a great showcase app right at our launch. The answer is when we launched the App Store, that solved all our problems. Of course, we then needed the number of iPhone users to grow because back then when the App Store launched, I think Apple had sold maybe 1 million iPhones, right? Or not much more than that. So we then had to watch that market grow to tens, hundreds of millions with both iPhones and Android. But yeah, it completely changed the game. And the reason is it eliminated all the friction, right? Because you don't have to memorize the phone number. That's friction, 2580. Now you just have an app. You don't have to, if you want to buy the song, you don't have to take your text message down to a record store so you can buy the CD. You can now just click and buy it from iTunes, instant download. So there's friction gone away. You don't have to pay 50 pence per use, right? Because every time you Shazam, it was free. So that's friction. So it's incredible how friction can hold any startup or product back from achieving its dreams and goals.
Was the first version already me clicking on a, let's say, larger button and it already started recognizing the sound and I got the music back? Was that the first original version and it didn't change too much in the years after?
That's correct, yeah. And if you ever want to see what the old version of Shazam looks like, go on YouTube and type in Apple commercial for Shazam, because you'll see this old version. Here's a fascinating story. This is sort of every entrepreneur's dream. But what Apple did after launching the App Store is they realized they had hundreds of apps, but there were certain apps that they thought were really amazing showcases of what the iPhone could do. And so they ended up building a standalone 30-second television commercial to run on national TV, built it on their own with their own budget, and then ran the campaign on their own budget as a national TV campaign. And it was literally a 30-second commercial, and all it did is showcase the Shazam app. And of course, at the end, it said, get an iPhone. It's actually funny for me to watch that commercial, because I don't know the year it was launched, but it was within a year or so of the iPhone App Store launching. And it was a very old version of Shazam.
How did you feel when you saw it for the first time?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was, amazing. Of course, it's just so delightful. It kind of feels like your baby is sort of finally coming out to the world, and it's just sort of everything you thought could be true is coming true. And of course, keep in mind, this is literally 8 years after I started the company with my 3 other co-founders.
You said you lost money on pretty much every new customer. So how the hell did you survive for 8 years until then? And even we then have to talk about, okay, what happened then and what became the business model. But like even the first 8 years, I can imagine there are a lot of founders out there that are like, holy crap, how should I bootstrap my company for 8 years?
Yeah. So this is why I like, and Fabian, we were talking a little bit before and about how I believe strongly that revenue is like oxygen to a company, to a startup. And the reality is that that's how we survived. We went searching for oxygen tanks. So just like imagine you're a scuba diver under the water and your oxygen tank is running to the end of its oxygen supply. You are going to die. And that's just like what it's like when you're a startup, when you're running out of cash. I mean, it's not like investors just keep throwing money at you, right? I mean, no matter how charismatic you might be, and no matter what a big dream you might have for your company, the reality is that many times when you burn out of that cash, you're up against a brick wall, basically. So what we did is we went out searching for other oxygen tanks, and we actually found these different ways of bringing in some revenues. They didn't cover all our costs, but they kept the company close enough towards profitability that it wasn't such a big ask to get a little bit more funding from investors, and all kinds of creative things. And this is the stuff I encourage all founders to think about. Is that you can find revenue streams that are even outside of what your core dream is. I mean, the great example I always like to give, by the way, outside of Shazam, is I joined Google in 2004, a few months before it went public, as an employee of Google. And many people don't realize that in the early days of Google, if you look at their financial statements of Google in its first few years, all the money came from a licensing deal to Yahoo. So Google was powering, or it was actually syndicating or powering search for Yahoo, and that's what brought in all the revenue. Of course, that's irrelevant today, but that's what sort of funded. It was their oxygen in those early years. So we did similar things. So and we did many things. I mean, I'll give you a few examples, right? And then keep in mind, this is driven by pure desperation to stay alive, right? So this is not building the dream of Shazam. This is building the dream of staying alive. So we did things like, we built a special app for Samsung phones, and these are old Samsung phones, not smartphones, so that when users had MP3 files on the phone, they would often have the incorrect metadata, so that you wouldn't be able to see what the song names were, the correct song names. And so Shazam would use our technology to identify what the song was and then fill in the correct metadata so that the songs on your Samsung phone would correctly display what they actually were after you had uploaded them to the phone. That was one technology. So we ran that as an ongoing licensing deal to Samsung. Another one is we built a version of Shazam that was white labeled for various companies. One was for Motorola. So that one was called Moto ID, MOTOID. And it was like a little Java app. So because there were apps before the smartphones of iPhone came out, and they were predecessors that were built on older technologies like Java. So we built a Java app that was preloaded onto Motorola phones, and it identified songs. And actually that was a licensing model where Motorola would pay Shazam per install. We also went to Japan, and we found a company and we just said, look, wouldn't you love to run this company, a Shazam, in Japan? Because, by the way, at that time, Japan was up there with Sweden as the most advanced mobile markets in the world. And so we actually just sold an exclusive license to a company in Japan so that we just like, here, you have the exclusive license. You can just run our technology and build your own Shazam in Japan for a lump sum. And then that brought in some cash into the company. And then we also built a B2B business. So we built a business where we actually would monitor thousands of radio stations using our technology, and just monitored what these radio stations were playing, because it turns out there were organizations that needed that information. As you know, when an artist gets a song played on the radio, they're due a royalty. And so to pay that royalty out, you need to know when their song is played on the radio and how often. So we licensed our technology for that, and that became a significant revenue stream for the company. So those are just a few examples, and there are more. But all the little things we're doing to just find revenue, like oxygen tanks, keep that oxygen tank filled with oxygen so that we can stay alive. And it was a long period, as we talked about. It was literally from launch 2002 until the App Store came out in 2008. And then finally, we took off like a hockey stick and attract new investment from Kleiner Perkins.
Today's investors, I think, would be like, yeah, but you have to be focused. And then you're like, yeah, but I don't have the luxury to be and stay focused.
Yeah.
I have to somehow survive. But today's, like, it's super interesting how times change on the one hand, and also like how perception of an investor who gives you money is so different from, okay, I am the founder, I have to make this work, and I also need to find all, like, 5 years ago I would not have got money. Like in your case, like it took a while until then the next investment, or the investment from Kleiner Perkins came, and in between I guess you talked to people, but it took until then that somebody really wanted to invest.
It's your job as the founder. Like you have to. Investors have lots of great advice, but not all the advice is 100% aligned with what you are, need to do to make your company successful. You're playing the long game as a founder, and you've got to find a way to survive. And it's not only about, are you going to be an overnight success and a billion-dollar unicorn? Not every company is, and we tend to think, we see the big success stories like Snapchat and Facebook, and then we think, oh wow, I want to be just like that. But you have to remember, there's also there's a whole bunch of companies that survive for many years before they finally made it through. And it's the job of the founder to find a path to that.
What were the hardest decisions that you had to make during this 6 to 8 year period from, let's say, having the idea until, or even launching until it took off?
And by the way, I should mention, just for perspective, so I started the company in 2000, and 4 years after starting the company, which is the typical vesting period, the company was barely surviving and struggling. I went on to go join Google at that time in 2004, and then stayed on the board as the most active, I'd like to say, board member of Shazam. I would put in, my estimate is 15, 20 hours a week into Shazam from that entire period from 2004 until finally Shazam was bought by Apple in 2018. So that's 14 years of not giving up. But it wasn't as a full-time employee. It was during that time we had hired in gray-haired management to run the company. And my role was to be a very, very active board member. Sorry, getting back to your question, what were some of the toughest decisions, I think
Yes,
you said?
but this also sounds like a tough decision, to let other people do it, be the board member, and then also trying to work as much besides the Google job to make it work.
It's weird. I mean, of course, like, we had rounds of layoffs, right? In Series B, when I was CEO of the company, literally just right so soon after sort of spending that first amount of money to get to launch. And those were, of course, incredibly tough, right? When you've hired a talented team of passionate people. But we were trying to survive in a period, after the dot-com bubble popped in. It was incredibly difficult to get additional capital. So, there's no doubt that there's almost no tougher thing to do as a CEO or founder of a company than to lay people off, the very people that had committed themselves to helping you build this amazing dream. I really think that, other than that, to me, every decision that I made or influenced as a board member, there's none that jump out as a tough decision. I kind of feel like I always felt like I knew strongly about what needed to be done. And I would say the tougher thing was gathering consensus, right? So getting other people on board. That is the toughest thing. The toughest thing is, how do you win over your board members, your venture capitalists, that this is what you need to do. Or once I was a board member myself, and I'm trying to win over the new CEO of this is what we need to do. I find that those are often the toughest things, because you have a vision, but it's very hard to if someone doesn't necessarily agree with you, it can be really, really difficult to win them over. I would say those are the toughest things.
Did you have it for a while that somebody was thinking completely differently than you were, and you were like, okay, I have to win this person over, otherwise we may have a lot of problems?
I mean, there's many, many, many examples. I have to write a book one day to gather them all. But I mean, one of the biggest ones that I'm quite open about is the size of the music database. It was one that I strongly believed that Shazam had to have an enormous music database, like vast music database that was much bigger than what others thought was necessary at many points in time. Look, part of that came from, here's the way I saw things play out with a new Shazam user. You show someone Shazam for the first time, they'd identify a song, and they would have an experience that was almost magical, right? It was so shocking that I often still to this day see a significant portion of people that can tell you they actually remember the first time they used Shazam, right? And think about how many products is that true for, right? I mean, my mom says she remembers when John F. Kennedy was shot and when the man landed on the moon. But there's not that. I don't remember the first time I used a MacBook, right? So there's not that many things that's true for. So that was the moment of magic. Wow, a phone can identify a song out of thin air. But then, guess what the second thing was that would happen? They would then say, does it have the little local band I grew up with in Frankfurt, right? Because that's what they want to know. Is they go, let's put this to the test. Is this really such a great song? Is this really such a great service? And so they'd go test it on that. That would be the second song they would test it on. And if you failed there, you could lose them forever. So I just believe we had to have every single song, every single country, every single genre. I mean, dance music, you name it, country music, everything, right? Up and coming bands that hadn't been signed by record labels, whatever. Nowadays, bands that are on, SoundCloud or whatever. So, but the reality is that I'm going to give you, the truth is that to have all those songs costs money. So you always have this, like, there's so many things as a startup. You have pressure, this balance of, well, if it costs money, how much money is there, right? I mean, you have this pressure to not spend too much money. And when it costs a lot of money because it's not just about getting the music, it's actually then housing the music in your search engine, right? And so that requires much more infrastructure. So I believed that investment was well worthwhile. And I put a lot of my effort into convincing everyone that it was worthwhile.
How much of that is perfectionism, and how much of that is just realism, that you have to have that amount of songs to please the second or third search of a new customer, new user?
I believe it. It's not, in my opinion, it's not. It happens to be both perfectionism but also realism. So I mean, the reality is, I think that's ultimately what wins. It's why Amazon won in having everything in its bookstores, and then all types of stores. It's ultimately, it's extremely important to hold on to the user, and it was inevitable that a day would come that if Shazam didn't do it, Google would do it, and then guess what would happen? You just lose all your users to Google. Luckily, that didn't happen, and even though Google has a competing service, Shazam dominates in music recognition. So yeah, it was absolutely mission critical.
It's interesting that you say, like, you worked at Google while you built Shazam, and you're like, yeah, otherwise Google would have done it. It sounds funny if you're looking back, and then you were pretty much at both companies at that time.
I was, but I disclosed to Google early on that I was the founder and a board member of Shazam. I then was aware that Google was building its own music recognition, which was just one of a billion projects at Google, and never one of giant scale within Google. And I was not involved in any way, right, in that project. I didn't even know the people that worked on it. But I did have to make sure that I didn't have any conflicts of interest, and share. I didn't have access to any information about what Google was doing in that area. so that I could share with Shazam. And I certainly didn't share what Shazam was doing with Google either. But yeah, you're right. It was something that we were all both aware of that potential conflict.
It's always interesting nowadays. Every founder who's building something that one of the large corporates and scale-ups could copy. The question is, yeah, but what if Google or Meta or Amazon or anyone else, depending on what you're doing, but is copying the service? And you, at the same time, you build something. Of course, Google, like back then, was not as huge as it is today, but still, you said it's one of the hundreds or thousands of projects that they were building. So what would you tell founders who are thinking about, okay, what if one of the large corporations is building the same thing as we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my view is it's a risk you have to always be aware of. I think that the risk varies based on what type of business you're offering. If what you're offering is if you're trying to compete with a platform, like let's say you're trying to build, contacts or something, contacts is sort of part of every phone, right? I kind of view it as being part of the platform. Or another great example is anti-malware, right? There was a company called Lookout, and it built like an Android app that helped you look for malware within other apps. Those kind of things compete with the platform. I mean, that's a core part of what Android and iOS want to make sure. They both, view it as a platform duty to make sure there's no malware in apps. So I think when you compete with a platform, that's very scary. There's a very good chance you're going to be crushed and made irrelevant by the platforms themselves. If what you're building is a service, a product, and you're competing against a Google or Facebook, as many companies have done, right? I mean, Google and Facebook. Google did. I think they built their own Twitter. They built their own Groupon. They built their own, so many different things. They built their own Facebook, right, with Google Plus. Then I think you're not necessarily going to be crushed and by Google. And by the way, Google does distribute its music recognition right at the right within search, which sits right on the face of every phone. So they have massive distribution power that exceeds the distribution power of Shazam, at least on Android. But I think as a founder, your job is to be even more obsessed with the user, be even more obsessed with creating an amazing user experience, be even more obsessed with the brand and the positioning and the features and the reliability and the love of the user, and win that way. And you can win that way if you're not competing with the platform.
Interesting. I think also helpful for a lot of founders how to also go into a conversation with somebody asking exactly that, like, what if? And let me add one more question that I wanted to ask earlier, but now it still makes sense. You talked about a few competitors and pretty much doing the same when we talk about figuring out what song you're listening to. Why did you survive? When you look at all these competitors, why or what is it that Shazam was special for, so that people really wanted to use it, and that you as a company also survived compared to all the others?
Yeah, well, I'm going to describe for you a user experience, okay, and then you tell me how delightful this is to the user. So you hear a song play on the radio, you pull out your phone, you know that the radio station is 105.3. So you need to know the radio station. So you type in 105.3 on the phone, and then it tells you what song is playing on the radio, right? That's a music recognition built by using radio recognition. So the service knows what's playing on every radio station, and that's all it knows. That is the service that all the competitors launched. So they did not launch, none of them launched what Shazam had. And as you can imagine, for a user, the disappointment is the clunky experience of having to know the radio station, friction, then having to type the radio station in, friction, and then being limited and having to know that you can only use this when it's radio. So you can't use it in a bar, club, cafe, movie theater, watching TV, all the other places that you hear music. It has to be radio play. So So basically, it's extremely limited, and if it's that's what all the other competitors launched. If we had done that, because we could have done that, I can tell you it would have been orders of magnitude easier to do because there were existing technologies that could monitor radio stations. It didn't require inventing our own algorithm that worked in a noisy environment. It didn't require building a vast database of millions of songs because there's only 100,000 songs played on the radio. And so it was just a far easier solution to create. But of course, it would be irrelevant today. And that's the reason all those companies are irrelevant, is that they built something just using traditional thinking. They didn't sort of really break through with a truly novel breakthrough idea.
This reminds me a lot about the current conversations about generative AI, where a lot of companies are just using a large language model and just maybe build a thin layer on top of it. And then there are others that are like working on algorithms, a lot of layers, different layers that they put on top, and like also create a very unique perspective on what they do with the large language model beneath everything. And so they create their kind of defensibility, and it always sounds like the typical talk of the town when people say, hey, or investors say, what's your defensibility? You're like, yeah, in these early stages, I don't have defensibility. But listening to your story, it definitely makes way more sense thinking about it from day one.
Yeah, we were doing something in a whole different league than all these other companies, basically. Yeah, whole different league.
How long or how much longer did it take you to launch because of that?
I mean, well, it was, as I said, it was not just, by the way, the other thing that's worth emphasizing is not just about how long to launch. It's about the risk of whether you could actually even create this solution. What I like to say is that, like, when Snapchat came up with an idea, they just simply, there was no doubt about whether it could be built. They built an app and they added a disappearing feature app. And it's the same with Facebook. I mean, a network that initially started off in universities, but there was no doubt. No one said, I don't know if that's even feasible, right? It was feasible. They just had to build it. So that, when you have to build something, that takes time. Now, there's a secondary thing where it's like, let's take a biotech company that says we're going to cure cancer. Okay, well, we don't even know if it will cure cancer. Will they be able to come up with a drug that cures cancer? We don't know. So that's truly inventing something, and that's the risk we were taking. We did not have an algorithm initially that could identify songs in a noisy environment, and actually, everyone told us it was impossible. So we went to the top academic experts in audio signal processing in the world. So many of them were at Stanford and MIT Media Lab, and they just said this is not possible, and we don't know of any technology that can do it. We don't even know how it can be invented. So that was the risk we were taking, is we had to invent the technology. And then on top of that, we then had to build this vast database of music so that, fingerprints, so they can all be identified. So that, yes, the answer to this, that did take a long time. We actually hired about 30 18-year-olds to put CDs into computers in 3 8-hour shifts, 24 hours a day. So literally 24 hours a day for 9 months. All they were doing is putting CDs into computers and running software that we had built from scratch to take the music off the CDs and then put it into this vast database that we created from scratch. Because remember, there was no iTunes, no Spotify, right? There was no digital databases. And then, by the way, they also had to type the name of every song, every album title, and every artist, because we needed the names to accompany the music fingerprints. So we had to. So that was a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of money to do all that. We had to build our own search engine from scratch, right? So we were literally searching all that music. So you put all that music into a huge database. It's like it's sitting there in the RAM of computers in the form of fingerprints. And now every time someone calls in, we're identifying the song. Well, how are we doing it? It's search. It's just like what Google had. So Google had built essentially a supercomputer, what's known as a Beowulf cluster, which is basically a bunch of PCs all wired together running custom software to turn all these PCs into a supercomputer. And we built the exact same thing, inspired by Google, which had started just 2 years before Shazam, 1998 instead of 2000. And we built the same thing. So we had to build from scratch a supercomputer Beowulf cluster. So basically, the efforts we were going to were orders of magnitude more than just simply getting a feed of what's playing on the radio from a company that monitors radio stations. It took us a year to launch from the point that we received venture capital. But prior to that, we had spent another year plus, inventing the algorithm just on angel capital and seed capital and so on. So I think in all, it might have been actually a total of 3 years from inception of starting the founding team to getting to actual launch of Shazam.
You said the best of the best in audio processing and everything that comes with it said it's not possible and they don't know how to invent it. How do you then invent it? And how do you motivate people to think about and try out and do that for a long time if the best of the best say it's not possible at all?
Yeah, I love that. You asked some good questions, Fabian. Well, there's two parts to the answer, really. There's finding the person that's going to invent it, and then there's motivating the person to invent it. So I'll answer each of those because they're both important. So finding the person, what I realized is that we needed someone who had a PhD in audio signal processing, which is electrical engineering, computer science, so it's signal processing. But within people that are PhDs in ECS, electrical engineering, computer science, some of them specifically focus in audio signal processing. And actually some of them had a passion for music. So we found a whole bunch of those people. Most of them, as I said, came out of MIT and Stanford because we were just going after the top institutions. And we found a bunch of them that had done their PhDs in Stanford or MIT in audio signal processing and published papers on music technology. So I had a list of about 30 people. We'll call it 30 people, right? But now here's the problem is that at this point we were 3 co-founders and we were all business people. We were not technical. And I was thinking when I would meet with these PhDs out of Stanford and MIT, they were all very smart people, right? They're MIT and Stanford PhDs in audio signal processing. And I kind of thought, how am I going to pick the smartest one to do this nearly insurmountable or seemingly insurmountable task? I don't even know. I mean, if I asked them anything about their work or the paper, if I asked them about the paper they were reading an hour before, I wouldn't understand a word they're saying because it's way above my head. And so I thought, well, you know what? I know the answer. The way I'm going to pick them is I'm going to ask a professor to tell me who the smartest one is. So we actually got a professor from Stanford named Julius Smith, and he joined us as our first advisor to the company, or first couple of advisors. And he didn't know how to do this either, by the way. He said, it's impossible. I don't know how to do it. He was worldwide eminent in the world of music audio signal processing. He had actually invented the synthesizers that are within all the algorithms, I should say, that are within all Yamaha synthesizers. So it was like this was the standard for all synthesizers worldwide. So he knew everyone. He was recognized by everyone. And as his first assignment as an advisor, and it's funny because founders often add advisors to their committees and say, oh, we have these advisors, but look when you can really, really get value out of an advisor. Talk about value. The first assignment for him was I showed him the list of 30 names that I had found, all MIT, Stanford, and Berkeley PhDs. And I said, can you help me rank the 5 smartest? And he knew all of these people because they all go to the same conferences. Many of them had done their PhD thesis under him. And I said, I need someone who's not only brilliant, but also deeply theoretical, and not only strong in audio signal processing, but extremely strong in mathematics and statistics. Because I viewed this as an inventor. We're trying to find an Einstein, basically. So we did that. We ranked the 5 smartest, and the number 1 rank on that list was this guy named Avery Wang, who had 4 degrees from Stanford in mathematics, statistics, and electrical engineering. PhD in audio signal processing, brilliant, amazing person. And he became the 4th co-founder to Shazam, which answers the second question, how do you motivate them? Well, he became a co-founder, right? I mean, he was part of the dream. He did not know how to do it. In fact, frankly, once he joined the company and we started, he actually said it was impossible as well. So, we didn't know, there was months and months where he almost gave up and just didn't know how to do this because, as I said, this is not like building a Snapchat. This is literally inventing something. We hired Julius as a consultant, the professor we hired as a consultant, and so that he could pair up and work with our co-founder. So we created a 2-person team, because when you're inventing something, what better way to invent something than to bounce ideas off of each other, right? So we had this professor, and then we had Avery, who had done his PhD thesis under the professor, and had both had great admiration for each other. And now they're working as a team to kind of try to think of ideas and try things and see what they can invent. And that's how we went about the process. Julius, I think, believed it was feasible. We didn't know how to do it, but he is a believer. Avery, my co-founder, there were times where there were doubt, and it was very exhausting and disconcerting to not know what the solution was. But I think having Julius involved really helped keep the bar high, right? I mean, because you imagine he had done his PhD thesis under Julius. So if this guy that he respected so much believed maybe it could be done, how can he give up then, right?
This sounds incredible. This sounds like you created one of these reality distortion fields until it works, and kept it alive for a very, very intense phase of time until it worked.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I think it's also like it at first it sounded like you only need like the one idea and then you build from there, but it seems like you need a bunch of ideas to create such a company like Shazam. It starts with, okay, what do we actually want to do? How are we able to solve it? Then figuring out if that's actually possible, and then figuring out so much more. So it's not only having one idea, it's one great idea, it's having a lot of great ideas that combined will end up in such a company and such a story.
Absolutely. It's many, many ideas. And I mean, as I said, the other examples of some of the ideas, in addition to the idea of, okay, you have the big one of, hey, let's identify songs out of thin air. And then you have like, okay, hey, how are we going to find this genius that's going to invent that, right? That's a new idea as a founder. And then you have, how are you going to motivate that person? Oh, we'll have this professor that he has so much respect for involved, right? And then you have, you have like, well, how are we gonna search? Oh, well, we'll build a search engine just like Google did, a supercomputer Beowulf, And then how are we gonna get a database? Oh, we're gonna build it from scratch. And then frankly, we even, how are we gonna get the CDs? We didn't have the CDs. We didn't own the CDs. How are we gonna do that? And so we came up with a unique idea for that, where we got access to all the CDs in the market for no cost by partnering with a company that had CDs. So yeah, just idea after idea. And the same thing happens at Google. I mean, you look at the Google story, and it wasn't just simply, the original idea for Google was just PageRank, right? It was just the fact that websites link to each other, and that's a great source of information to determine what's the best result. But then if you think that was basically all Google did, no, you'd be wrong, right? I mean, it's like they did so much more about, okay, scalable architectures for hardware and focusing on speed, and then AdWords, which by the way was initially resisted by Larry and Sergey. It's like the whole ad model, which became a huge part of what funded Google's growth. So yeah, it's just, I call it creative persistence. It's all about like not only being persistent like every entrepreneur should be, but really thinking creatively about every solution, and not just kind of going what the default way is, but really kind of coming up with very unique and often very unorthodox ways to solve problems along the way.
What would you say? You've been at Google and Dropbox for a while each. What have you learned there that you then tried to give your Shazam team on the way, or used in the 15 to 20 hours a week for Shazam too?
What did okay, let me just make sure I understood that. What did I learn at Google and Dropbox?
You worked at Google and Dropbox for a long time each, and while Shazam was built, but you were board member and very active. It took you 15 to 20 hours a week, but you still, as a day job, worked for Google and Dropbox. And both of these companies seem to be like, or at first, Google was a bit ahead, like on what they've done and like how large they are. So what did you learn at Google, for example, that you then brought into Shazam because you had it as an inspiration?
Oh gosh, yeah, it's hard to remember all the different things, but let's see. I mean, look, one of the biggest ones is is speed. The speed of response in a consumer service is significantly more important than you might think. So in fact, even if you were to ask users to say, I'll give an example. If you were to show a search on Google and then compare it to a search on Bing, and I'm not speaking about today, I'm speaking about in the years that I was at Google, right, 2004 to 2011, they would both look incredibly fast and pretty much almost instantaneous. And so if you ask users, are you happy with the speed? They would both say, yeah, I'm happy with the speed. But the reality is that Google actually was tiny, tiny fractions of hundreds of a second faster than Bing, because Google would invest very heavily in co-location and just eliminating all latency, basically end to end in the experience wherever they could, to the point of even owning dark fiber, the actual communications network. And it turned out that actually matters. That really matters to users, and it helped. It wasn't just about the search relevance and the quality of the search results, but also the speed that over time attracted users, because at a subconscious level, people actually care about a nearly instantaneous experience. And that was something that I believe strongly was a key to Google's success, and something that I very much raised as something that Shazam has to stay very focused on, because it's very easy when you have engineering teams to focus on solving lots of problems that ultimately lead to more latency for the user. So you think, I'm solving this and I'm solving that. Now I have a SDK for advertising and all these things, but all those bloat layers just will increase latency and slow down the experience. And so I believe I brought with me learnings and instituted an obsession with speed. And luckily, Shazam bought into that. There was no resistance on that. But it is, certainly Shazam is very, very fast, and there's many, many components to speed, right? You've got the actual app and its launching, but you also have the recognition, how much sound has to be captured. There's so many layers to speed. But I believe that's one of the big ones from Google.
I think that's also super important to know, because by now everybody knows how Google works, but everybody forgets how they started. So. And a lot of people have not experienced it, and including me. I can definitely not remember my first Google search. It's a long time ago. So therefore, I think that's a valuable lesson from them. I have one more personal question that I think is interesting to me. You started Google, and then you switched over to Dropbox. At the same time, Shazam grew and grew. You said the tipping point was with launch of the App Store, and you had hired a senior team for Shazam. Was there ever the feeling of, hey, I should get back into the company? I wish I was not only spending 15 to 20 hours a week as a board member. I wish I was spending all my week on Shazam.
No, I felt like as a very active board member that. You have to remember what the involvement that I had at Shazam was not your typical board member role. I mean, what I did is I ended up I basically forged direct personal relationships with the key contributors to Shazam, right? So like the head of product, the CTO, actually the head of music acquisition. Some of the people that I viewed as being the most critical to Shazam's future success, and then I just forged relationships with them and forged and built as much influence as I could in a positive way, so that and with of course with the CEOs as well. I mean those had a little more friction, I'd say, the relationship, because there's a natural sort of discomfort, I guess, and having a variance of views, but. So I was quite satisfied with that ability to influence Shazam on the most important things, and I felt like I could balance that as well as enjoy what was really a fascinating career at Google. I was their first mobile partnerships person, so I put in place the original deals with companies like the big carriers and mobile phone manufacturers around the world, and the original Android deals as well. So I didn't want to walk away from that, and I was quite happy to have both both as part of my life.
Fair enough. Towards the end, tell us a bit about your day-to-day today. So what are you, I said in the beginning, you're now a keynote speaker, but I can imagine that you're doing a bit more than just that.
Yeah, I have a bootstrapped early stage startup. In addition to being a keynote speaker, so there's sort of like two parallel things. Right now, the keynote speaking is a bit more of a focus because I've been on it's in high growth mode, shall we say? I guess as I'm speaking to bigger and bigger audiences, whether thousands of people and around the world, and I love that. I love being able to inspire people to be innovative and think differently. But it enables me. That career also enables me to have time as it grows and gets more momentum to also work on this sort of passion project that I have. It's a bootstrap startup that has not raised money called Guard. That's Guard. Guard. And what Guard is that my dream is to create a solution that will use AI to prevent drowning in swimming pools. And so it's an impact-driven company, and it will never be $1 billion company. In fact, in my belief, it will never achieve the financial success that justifies venture capital funding. It's just simply not a big enough market. But I do believe that it will have a meaningful impact on the world by saving lives, and we'll be able to measure it because it'll be a cloud-connected hardware device that sits inside a swimming pool on the wall of the pool, and using computer vision, use cameras and AI, it's able to watch and learn and determine if someone is actually drowning. And I should emphasize not just falling in the pool, but actually drowning. And if that's happening, we can immediately alert people around the pool and in the household using piercing alarms, and people can be saved. If the thing about drowning is there's actually a small amount of time, and we're talking about a very small amount of time, like a minute or two, where if you're aware and you find them, you can pull them out of the water and you can bring them back to life before the brain damage has occurred. But if you don't, and another couple minutes passes, then it's too late. And the big misleading aspect of drowning is that in movies you see them sort of flailing their hands and splashing and saying, "Help me, help me." And I think so we tend to think that's what drowning looks like, and therefore we'll know if someone's drowning because you'll hear the screaming. But the reality is, sadly, drowning actually is silent, because what happens is someone slips under the water and there's no sound whatsoever. And so no one can realizes someone's drowning, and that many drownings occur where a parent might be 15 feet away from the pool, and a drowning occurs for their child, for example. So that's my project, Guard. As I said, bootstrapped company but we've developed we filed patents on some unique concepts, and I work with experts, including computer vision professors. Yet again, sounds like a repeat of Shazam.
I wanted to say that too.
Yeah, and drowning experts and hardware experts and so on to solve that problem. And ultimately, it will need to raise some capital, a significant capital in the millions of dollars, but it will probably be more impact-driven investors at that time.
That sounds amazing. Like very, very important topic too, and also looking like. But it sounds like you also like, as you mentioned, it's pretty similar. That you have to develop it first. It's nothing too easy. That it has its complexity with it. You're going through that whole cycle again, at least, with the confidence that it worked the last time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation. I will link towards your keynote speaking, but also to Guard, to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, and I'm super, super thankful for your time, and would love to give you and hand over the last words of the bakery to you.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's see. Well, I guess, look, I mean, ultimately, I go to a lot of conferences, and I meet lots of groups of people from different industries, and it's really hard to beat the passion of groups of entrepreneurs. So I love that what you're doing with Unicorn Bakery to inform, educate, and inspire founders and entrepreneurs. I think that's because I have so much appreciation for the pure passion that they have as they pursue their visions and dreams. And all I can say is I love to see their successes, and wishing the best of great outcomes to everyone listening.
Thank you so much.